Are you a crappy partner, crappy wife, crappy husband, crappy mate? This podcast is for you. Give yourself the gift of self-awareness. Learn new skills. Take the time to assess your partnership, marriage, relationship, etc. So how are we going to do this? Start by taking the Crappy Mate quiz. The quiz can be found on our website, www.crappymate.com, on Pinterest, Crappy Mate, Instagram and Facebook, Crappy Mate Podcast. We will dedicate episodes to discussing the quiz topics. In further episodes, we will be exploring common problems, the speed bumps that occur in relationships. Also, we will introduce time-tested skills and helpful hints to enhance your relationship, and we invite you, our listeners, to contribute your thoughts, questions, or concerns regarding relationships. Welcome to the Crappy Mate Podcast. I'm Dr. Richard Vance Barnes, MD. I'm a board-certified general psychiatrist with 25 plus years in psychiatry. I have treated patients in a variety of settings, both inpatient units, outpatient units, partial hospitalization units, as well as detoxification programs and rehabilitation programs. And I've had a private practice for many, many years.
And I'm Barbara Quaid, a marriage and family therapist. I also have over 25 years experience working with families, individuals, and couples. And my life as a therapist has been both humbling and joyful. Before we get started, I'd just like to talk about our disclaimer. The Crappy Mate podcast is designed to be a useful tool to help individuals and couples have happier and healthier relationships. This podcast is not a substitute for individual or couples therapy, and as always, relationships need to be safe. Seek professional help as needed.
The Crappy Mate podcast was developed out of hearing years and years of stories and accounts from patients in therapy about their mates and themselves actually being crappy mates and poorly behaving within the relationship. And so this concept was then developed into a podcast of how can we help people to actually improve upon their relationships.
And so in order to do this, we developed a quiz. And the quiz, we really thought about some concepts that we thought were important in a relationship. And so the Crappy Mate quiz ended up being a 10-question self-scoring assessment that can be found on our Facebook page. And our Facebook page is aptly named the Crappy Mate Podcast. And along with the quiz, you will find a glossary with the terms we used both in the podcast and on the quiz. And this is so we can all be on the same page. Now, to score the quiz, you will read each question carefully and then ask yourself, do I do this almost always, sometimes, or almost never? And when we thought about this, the scoring is like this. Almost always is worth 3 points. Sometimes 2 points, and almost never 1 point. So once you have your total points, you add them up. And a score of 10 to 17 clearly indicates that one needs improvement. A score of 17 to 24, one has a degree of awareness, but improvement can still be beneficial. And a score of 24 to 30, one is aware, insightful, and acting in a positive manner as it pertains to the relationship. Welcome to the Crappy Mate podcast. In today's episode, we are going to be talking about work and work schedules and the impact on relationships. And so we'll be talking about night shift workers, people who have different kinds of difficult schedules, military, people who travel for work, long-distance relationships, and even those who have lost jobs. So let's begin with just talking about what it's like for night shift workers.
Well, thank you, Barbara. I think this is a topic that comes up a lot in sessions, and it has a lot to do with how the relationships progress and how they stand in most cases, because this is a great imposition to relationship, and that is the work schedules, the time away from one another, and it's really the time away that presents as a difficult issue with the work schedule. I find that it stretches and it really sheds light on how do we communicate as a couple.
Well, when you talk about night shift workers, sometimes there's one working night shift and the other person is working the day shift. So it's like two shifts passing in the night. Yes, definitely.
Yes.
And so there's all kinds of implications for that. Like, when are you going to have time to see one another? How do you manage household chores and sleep patterns? You know, when one person's home, the other person is just getting up or trying to sleep. It becomes very difficult, I think, in a lot of cases.
It is difficult in a lot of cases. And I think, again, because we're not communicating as regularly as we could because of the shift and imposition of work schedules, it can lead to other issues within the relationship. And I think that at times people may start to think that maybe I'm not quite as in love with my partner anymore. Maybe I'm not quite as connected to my partner anymore. And I think it all has to do with the fact that people are not seeing one another and they're not communicating quite as much. And with that, there's the ambiguity. There's a question that can come up in the relationship around trust. And so I think shift work really and differences in schedules really present as a great obstacle in any relationship.
Well, you talk about communication in this, but one of the things that I see, especially for shift workers, is that it's the work that they can get. So it wasn't planned from the beginning, and that makes it more difficult to talk about it. And for example, if we look at people like firefighters, for example, who have these kind of crazy rotation schedules, they have to find a partner who can manage the home or the family when they're gone.
Yeah, the firefighters in particular, that's a very difficult occupation, not only for the dangerousness of putting out fires and helping people that are at times in real trouble, but it's that the hours that they work. They'll be on shift for 3 or 4 days at a time with 24-hour expectancy in terms of their work schedules. But then once they leave that, they have to come back to their home, come back to their partners. And in most cases, they're physically and emotionally exhausted. So they're not really going to be that available once they return back to the home. These are great issues for people with shift work, in particular firefighters. They really have a hard time with this reintroduction, in a sense, back into the family after being away for a couple of days or just doing shift work for the time period that they're doing it.
Well, one of the things that I have found in my practice is that in a lot of cases, this shift work or this being away from your partner for long periods of time kind of can lead to insecurities in yourself and jealousy. And jealousy, I think, can really, it's the green-eyed monster. It can really poison a relationship. But I think there's ways that you can work around that. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree with that. And jealousy can be an issue for couples, in particular when they're separated based on their shift work and their working schedules. But to me, Barbara, when I think about jealousy, I almost think about immaturity with jealousy. I think that in most cases, I'm of the opinion that when you are secure in a relationship and you're mature in that relationship, you allow trust to really be the overriding feature in the feelings that you have when people are separated away from you. So in other words, I challenge my people to not go to the jealousy button when they're thinking of their partners being separated from them or away from them, but go to the trust button and use trust to help you to avoid the jealousy and really the immaturity of jealousy.
I would agree with that. And one of the things that I always think about this, is that if you aren't jealous, or if you try to figure out your own jealousy and why you are jealous, then it's better for you, for the person living with it. Because if you're not jealous, you can live more happily. You can be more secure in your relationship. So it's not just for the partner that's away, it's for the person who is experiencing these feelings.
Well, jealousy is something I think also it leads to really the destruction of a relationship. It can, because it calls for you to fill in, so to speak, and to imagine and to assume what your partner is actually doing, or you're anticipating what your partner's doing. And I think that thought process can really be disruptive to a relationship and really presents itself as a form of toxicity to the relationship, especially jealousy that does not have any basis behind it.
And I think that's kind of akin to anxiety. So people who are married to someone who's a firefighter or in the military, you could spend all your time worrying about what situations they may or may not be in. But what you're doing is you're allowing your imagination to just run away with itself.
Exactly.
And really, there's nothing you can do about it anyway. So the worry is not productive.
It's not productive. And again, I challenge my patients to use trust instead of jealousy, and to think about it in terms of trusting their partners and knowing the love that they do have, that they can leave their partners and allow them to do their shift work or be outside of the home without the thought that something nefarious is actually happening. You have to use trust in those situations to really get past that feeling of jealousy.
And again, communication is huge with all of these things because, of course, in the case of a military couple, they don't have a choice about where they're going to go or for how long they're going to be deployed or away from the house. So that's out of their control. And then people who travel a lot for work, well, they would also argue that, this is part of the job. They have to be away. So it's really about talking about this and figuring out what's working, what's not working in the relationship. And really knowing that this is what I'm going to be doing. This may not be forever, but this is what I need to do now.
I think shift work and work in terms of anything that takes people out of their homes for extended period of time, I think it just really draws on the fact that you have to be able to communicate exactly what is happening and what we are expected to do, and be very clear about the roles that we play in terms of, like, for instance, maintaining a home and how are we going to manage taking care of our children. So I think it's important that communication really is highlighted in a relationship, and it comes to the forefront when we are separated by the work hours that we have to perform.
And that communication has to be often and at different stages, because there's always going to be different stages in your relationship or in the growth of your children.
I would agree with that. It calls for you to be constantly reevaluating how we communicate and how often we communicate and how effective we're communicating with one another. I think this is the only way that people can really maintain a healthy relationship, a satisfying, loving relationship, while they are spending so much time apart.
When you talk about it, I go to the nitty-gritty, like chores, like who does what and when, and what are the responsibilities of the partner who's been away, and what do they do to help encourage the partner that's manning the house, for example?
Yeah, this comes up a lot, and I see this in my practice quite often because I have a number of patients that are professionals, and I have nurses, I have doctors, and they work long hours. I have firefighters as well. They work very long hours in different shift work. And the key in all of these relationships still is communication, and what type of communication I'm having with my partner. How effective am I in my communication? Am I being open enough? Am I being transparent enough so that my partner knows exactly what I'm doing when I'm actually away from the home?
Dr. B, in this day and age, I know a number of couples, in my own family included, where one part of the couple, they might even be bi-coastal, and they both have careers, and these are really important careers to each of them. And these were careers that they had before they met. So they're already established in their careers, and their careers are going to take them different places. So they know that beforehand, but it still has all these challenges, like how to meet, when to meet, What do you do together? How do you make time for each other? And how do you even communicate over Zoom or FaceTime or on your devices?
And I think it is the devices that we have today, the technology that we have today that allows for better communication when we are so far distant from one another as a couple. When you're talking about a coastal relationship, the thing that comes to mind in that situation is the time that we have together is very precious. And so when we are together in person, we have to make that very effective, that time together. And so I think while we're not together, we're using technology. We're doing, for instance, Zoom or FaceTime or what have you to communicate. But when we come together, that time has to be really protected in terms of its positivity. And we want to make sure it's a very positive experience while we have that time together. But I think the buildup is everything that we talk about beforehand, how we communicate beforehand before we are getting together, because within that communication, we are establishing time frames for when we will spend time together. How are we, for instance, if it's a marriage or a long-term committed relationship with children, for instance, how am I going to reintroduce myself back into the family, into the home once I've been away and not disturb the routines that have been established in terms of childcare or picking up kids, even what chores are performed before the partner who is at home leaves for the particular work. So there's a lot of things that go into, for instance, a long distance relationship and keeping it a satisfying one and a healthy one. Again, the root of that has to be trust and communication.
And prioritizing the relation.
And prioritizing, yes.
So how about for those who have lost jobs or don't work? And I see this oftentimes when they come into the office, there's one person who's working, one person who hasn't worked in maybe over a year. Capable, but just hasn't found a job in their field. And I think that causes a lot of anxiety in the relationship. What would you say?
I would agree with that. I think that it can be very stressful, and not to pick on men, but I think that if we're talking about, for instance, a male partner, a man who has lost their job, well, a lot of times in my experience, their egos take a real hurting in that situation. And because of that, it leads to more tension in the relationship because of some feelings perhaps of inadequacy. Why can't I find a job? Why haven't I found? And I think that in our society, we've been trained that, and it is changing, and I'm so happy it is shifting, but we've been sort of trained to believe that men should be the breadwinners. Thankfully, it's shifting, but I think for a lot of men in our society, we've internalized the feeling that we have to be the provider, that we have to be the one who goes out and earns the bacon, so to speak. And so I think when there's not work, or we've lost a job, or we're not able to secure employment, I think that's a major blow to our egos. And I think that it creates some tension within the home because we are not providing as we may have internalized and believed and were raised to believe that we should.
I think there's anxiety on the other side as well, because then the partner is thinking, well, when are they going to get a job? Or are you applying for jobs? There's not just the loss of the job, is there the intent to find another job? And I think this creates tension in the couple.
That can absolutely create a great deal of tension. And I think the only way to dissipate that is to be open and to be transparent about the efforts and the desires to not only secure new employment or new work, or to make the adjustments that we have to make if this, for instance, is a retirement. Is it productive for me to be in the home and just watch TV all day? Is it productive for me to sleep up until 1 or 2 o'clock every afternoon because I am retired? And obviously that's going to impact the relationship.
I think that's a huge issue. Once a person retires, I think both partners need to be talking about what's in it for the next stage of life. What are the plans? Because I think if you have that person who's just going to lay about all day, really discouraging for the partner. They want someone who's doing something, who's still creative, who's still doing something to better themselves.
I would agree with that. No, I would agree with that. And as we've talked in previous episodes about being the very best that you can for your mate, to present to your mate, because it will, in fact, influence the relationship and how healthy and happy you can be in a relationship. So you want to be your best self. We always want people to present their best selves to the relationship. So looking at that from the perspective of either unemployment or retirement, those are things to seriously consider. Am I being my best self in those situations? Am I providing the most that I can to the relationship?
Well, thank you for that. And with that, I'm going to provide some helpful hints. And number one, talk with your partner about work schedules. And this is talk that has to be ongoing. There's a number of transitions in your life, and so you have to keep talking about it. Number two, discuss the current situation and any potential issues around schedules, because that's going to come up. Driving kids to school or a number of different, I would say, little problems that just pop up. Number three, discuss future possible changes in work schedules. So not everything has to remain the same. There are chances to change schedules. Number four, discuss expectations for each partner in terms of household chores and responsibilities. And again, that's ongoing. Number five, have couple meetings regularly to discuss the pros and cons of the current working situation. So for me, having a couples meeting is really important. We do this in my household pretty much on a daily basis. It's pretty informal, but you would just say, what's on your agenda for today? What time do you think you'll be home? And I'm going to be doing this, and I'll pick up groceries, etc. But it's really kind of just setting the tone for the day. Number six, problem solve solutions. So just look at things. If there are problems, try to find solutions for them. And then number seven, and this is the most important, make time for yourselves as a couple. And that's prioritizing yourselves as a couple.
Well, thank you for that, Barbara. I think those helpful hints will be very helpful. And as always, thank you to our listeners for tuning in to the Crappy Mate podcast. Thank you. In closing the podcast today, I just want to remind our listeners of our disclaimer. The Crappy Mate podcast is designed to be a useful tool to help individuals and couples have happier and healthier relationships. This podcast is not a substitute for individual or couples therapy. And as always, relationships need to be safe. Seek professional help as needed.
Thank you for listening to the Crappy Mate podcast. We invite you to submit comments, questions, and/or concerns about today's podcast, or give us feedback on relationship topics you'd like to hear covered. We encourage you to try our helpful hints. Give these a go, try them on for size. Remember, you can follow us on our Facebook and Instagram pages under the Crappy Mate podcast. Our website is www.crappymate.com. And please be sure to subscribe. Thank you for listening.